Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Podcast 83, the podcast put on by the Michigan Association of Counties. This week, we are joined by Adrian Hemond from Grassroots Midwest and Hemond and Sellek from Harbor Strategic. Together, they are known as Baldly Partisan. I'll let you, decide where they got that name from on your own. But a couple good guys here from Michigan. They've worked with Mac over the years in a variety of different ways. Today, though, we've got them in to talk a little bit about some of the races going on in the state of Michigan, both at the state house level. We'll talk a little bit about that open federal Senate seat, maybe the congressional seat that's now opening because of who's running there, and maybe even we'll talk a little presidential politics. So, guys, thanks for joining me. You guys looking forward to talking about this stuff today?
Yeah, absolutely. It should be a good time. There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, so we're try to keep this as efficient as possible, but we don't want to leave anything out. So let's talk a little bit about some of the state house races. We've got a slim majority in the House right now, Democratic majority. Of course, the first trifecta in 40 years. What are you guys hearing as some vulnerable seats that are coming up this in a few short weeks?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, both sides have got plenty of seats that are in play this time. Obviously Republicans are trying to flip majority. And so they're looking at places like Representative Jamie Church's downriver. I'd say that that's probably number one targeted seat in the state right now, because it's an area of the state that's trending the wrong way for Dems. But Dems have an incumbent who's a pretty hard worker. And then you look over in Battle Creek, for instance, where State Rep Jim Hodsma is running in an area that, particularly outside the city of Battle Creek, is trending pretty hard towards the Trump brand of Republican. And Hodsma has not always been the most enthusiastic about being in Lansing. He doesn't actually like it here very much. He'd prefer to be back home. So that's near the top of the list as well in terms of Democrats that are targeted. But as we've been talking about for a couple election cycles now, Republicans are softening up a little bit in Oakland County. And so you look at Representative Mark Tisdale, Representative Thomas Kuhn as folks that might be vulnerable on the Republican side. And then there's that Jackson seat, right, which Republicans won 2 years ago because Democrats nominated somebody who had a criminal history that they didn't find out about till after the filing deadline. And so Republicans hold that seat right now, even though it's got a pretty decent Dem base in it. So those are probably my top five right now. But I'm sure John feels somewhat differently.
I would somewhat agree overall. I think if we went back to the date that the Detroit Free Press published a poll on a Sunday saying that Donald Trump was leading in Michigan by 7 points, I think the jumping up and down and popping champagne corks over at the House Republican Campaign Committee was probably in full swing. House Republicans were probably headed for a repeat of probably one of the bigger margins we've seen in that 63 to 67 range if Biden had stayed in the race. That was an important day for Democrats, obviously, in a lot of ways, but especially here, because back then, those Oakland County Republican seats had just sort of fallen off the map. If we had started off with a generic discussion 6 or 8 months ago, we would have said, oh, there might be some weakness for GOP in Oakland, some weakness for the Dems in Macomb. But all those defend seats really for the Republicans had disappeared. So they've kind of crept back into the picture a little bit. Vice President Harris has done a decent job kind of recovering the base Democrat vote. She's still weak in a lot of areas on that front because Biden was so bad, and she, coming out of nowhere, has to recreate herself as a candidate instead of as the vice president. That's difficult. So we are seeing the Democrats go on offense in Oakland. They're running television ads against Representative Donnie Steele and Representative Mark Tisdale. Part of that function is that they have more money than anybody. They're so loaded with cash that they can blow all this money on TV, even though it's essentially inefficient because they're having to run an ad that says, Oakland County's X or downriver's Y. It's not really super targeted. So they're spending money there on offense, but really they're having to spend the most money on defense. And Adrian touched on the seats that are probably the most trouble, especially Jamie Church's and downriver. A tough place for them to win when Donald Trump has won that seat repeatedly. Same goes if you skip up to Macomb County, to Nate Shannon, and maybe to some extent Denise Menser. You're going to see some real problems there. The Democrats know that they're in line theoretically to lose a couple seats. That would put us at even. So they're going to, with all this money they have, they're going on offense in a few places. I'm not sure knocking off an incumbent, even with a lot of money, is going to go super well right now. Somebody like Mark Tisdale was in local government before he was elected to the state house. He's got a strong background there. So it's an uphill battle for Democrats. And frankly, the place we could end up that we've now started talking about, Adrian and I, more often, is 55-55. And that would be, well, insanity, but historical insanity.
Yeah, but we're
Hey,
consultants, so we make more money that way.
well, right. Yeah, exactly. That's what I figured you were going to say. Yeah, some interesting stuff there. And a lot of former county commissioners, actually, you guys mentioned there. Hadsma's a former county commissioner. I think he's running against another county commissioner, Steve Frisbee. Kuhn, some of these other guys you've mentioned are former county commissioners. So you can kind of see how the county commission has been at least a launching pad for some legislators and kind of a landing spot for for those that get term limited at some point in time.
It's
Some
pretty
interesting
interesting,
stuff
actually.
there.
You mentioned Hadsma, and so did Adrian earlier. I mean, that switch was really important for looking at what the Dems are facing because they had to shift $2 million worth of television advertising from the Kent County seats that they just won and feel like they've got a decent grasp on into same media market, but into the Hadsma race closer to Battle Creek. And so nowadays, I just basically look at, you can draw a rectangle box around I-94 from the west side over there by Kalamazoo, totally skip over and pretend Ann Arbor doesn't exist because it's on another planet. Jackson into Monroe and downriver, all those seats are battlegrounds and they're all up for grabs and they're all having a ton of money spent on them. But the one thing in common with all of them is that those are the areas that are shifting toward Republicans and Donald Trump. And we know that Donald Trump is the Republicans' turnout machine and he's on the ballot.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Three districts that we had kind of heard about early, not sure if they're still in play. Fitzgerald, which is a Grand Rapids area, Kafia, Grand Traverse County, and Gen Hill up in the UP. What are you guys hearing in those races?
Well, there's not only a lot of money being spent on those races by Republicans, but there's a lot of third-party groups that are dropping cash on all those candidates. The Republicans love Lisa Trombley in that seat. I think Representative Kofia, a lot of people think maybe she's too left for her district, but if you look at what's happened in the city of Traverse City, it's blue as the sky, and connecting Leelanau was won by Biden and Whitmer. So she might be in a decent area, but the Republicans like their candidate there. The equal kind of spending is happening in Marquette. And the hilarious thing to say is that TV is cheap. It's cheap in Marquette. So all the extra money and any other money they have, they're piling in there on that race as well. So, and the Republicans are going to play in the Fitzgerald seat until the end because of the candidate they have and Tommy Brand. So I expect all three of those also to be right up there at the top.
Adrian, anything to add on those?
Yeah, I mean, John more or less nailed it. Republicans got the right candidate in the 109th, in the weatherman, Carl Bonek. I'm still skeptical that they're actually able to flip that. The base numbers in that seat have actually gotten worse post redistricting for Republicans, but they have the right candidate there, and it's so that one's going to be competitive. And then you mentioned John Fitzgerald over in Grand Rapids. The GOP brand in Kent County is in the tank right now, but the secret weapon that they've got in the 83rd House district is former state representative Tommy Brand, whose name ID is essentially at 100% in this district between his prior career in politics as a state representative, but more importantly, as the proprietor of Brand's Steakhouse. If you live in that county, you've probably eaten at least one steak in Tommy's joint, and he probably came over and said hi to you. And that sort of thing goes a long way. So I think Fitzgerald ultimately makes it, but Tommy Brand's going to make that seat way closer than it should be based on the base numbers and the trouble the GOP brand is in Kent County.
Yeah, so it sounds like we got a 55-55 potential prediction here. So we'll see what happens, and some interesting races there. Let's move on to the Debbie Stabenow, again, former county commissioner, youngest county commissioner in Ingham County. You can sense a theme on this podcast, but she's retiring after many years of public service. Now we have Mike Rogers, a former congressman, and Alyssa Slotkin, a money-making machine over there, kind of running for this seat. What are you guys hearing on that one?
So this one's super interesting. I think you have to favor Congresswoman Slotkin here for a couple of reasons. Number one, she's been consistently outrunning the top of the ticket since before Joe Biden dropped out. Before Joe Biden dropped out, that might have led to a close loss. But Kamala Harris is running essentially even at the top of the ticket. That helps her a lot. You alluded to her being a fundraising machine. And that's a huge part of this. She's an outstanding fundraiser with a long track record. But also, I think that there's some disappointment on the GOP side with the fundraising operation in the Rogers camp. He's raising money at a clip like he's running for his old seat in the Congress. But that's not enough for a statewide race. As Slotkin or Governor Whitmer could tell you, it takes a lot more in terms of fundraising. And he hasn't really met the bar there in terms of having the resources to compete. And we saw this pre-primary, right? Pre-primary, Congresswoman Slotkin was already up statewide with ads defining herself for the electorate. And former Congressman Rogers couldn't do that because he didn't have the money. He had to sort of wait and hold his fire, even though his primary was not all that competitive once he got the Trump endorsement. But he couldn't really afford to spend money defining himself pre-primary to the general electorate because he needed to marshal those resources for a push down the stretch. I think in retrospect, that strategy is not going to work out as well for them. But of course, they made that decision when Joe Biden was still at the top of the ticket, and we're in a very different environment now.
Yeah, John, anything to add?
Democrats have done a few things right. Debbie Stabenow made sure that if she was going to walk out of the Senate and actually enjoy her life, unlike a lot of much older U.S. senators, I mean, she could have stayed there another 20 years and still been right in the pathway of what goes on there. But she did a lot of the dirty work behind the scenes to try to clear the field for Slotkin, even though to people like Adrian and I, like Slotkin's always seemed like a logical, if not the candidate for the next generation of Dems that kind of play from that centrist, at least messaging standpoint, if not voting. The other thing here is we have to remember is she still had a few struggles. She got beat badly in the city of Detroit by a massively underfunded Hill Harper. She lost 60-40 in Detroit, and there's all kinds of things going on in Detroit right now at the presidential level. So she's had to work hard there. But essentially, I like to think about this race as that they were like kind of the same person, except male, female. They both represented the same seat. They both kind of did the whole intelligence/CIA thing. Look at my military background. And the difference is that they both needed to introduce themselves to the rest of the state because God love Lansing, I'm from there, but it's the worst media market in the state besides up north to be from when you're running for statewide office. So they both had to introduce themselves, like Adrian said. Slotkin is very good at fundraising. She was able to introduce herself first and start laying some of the wood to Rogers. However, right now, for basically the last almost 4 weeks of the campaign on the air, spending is at parity because the Washington Republicans, they wanted Mike Rogers in the general for a reason because they knew out of everybody that was in the primary, he was the one that could really make a challenge for Slotkin. I think they waited too long to come in, but that doesn't mean it's over. So they're at spending parity right now. And I think Rogers finally found his footing when he started talking about the electric vehicle factories and Chinese ownership and all that good stuff. That made for actually what I think are two of the better debates that we've seen in Michigan. Two really smart people really going toe to toe and with some passion. I actually enjoyed watching those two debates. So we got a good race for this seat. And I think if Trump does better than I think the polls are showing, because a lot of the people he's depending on are not the people that answer phones and talk to evil government secretive pollsters. If he wins by 3 or 4 points, that's going to help Rogers get to the final hoop. Rogers is just running behind Trump with the GOP. So he has a higher ceiling. Trump perhaps can help pull him across along with this at parity spending now that's going on the airwaves.
Yeah, I want to get to that in a minute here on the what your guys' thoughts are, some of the ticket splitting that might go on. But let's move on to Tom Barrett and Curtis Sattel, two former colleagues from here in Lansing, now running for Congressman Slotkin's soon-to-be open seat. What are you hearing on that one?
Steve, they're the regular guys. Haven't you seen the ads? They're just the dudes. And this election all seems to be about the dudes all of a sudden, from the presidential on down. You've got Tom Barrett wearing a hat that says dad, and you've got Curtis filling his lawnmower and hanging out with regular guy beer, and he smokes meat and all that jazz. They are trying to out regular each other. Neither one of them are really like suited for where a lot of the energy is in electoral politics right now. Having two like older white dudes running against each other probably isn't the ideal necessarily for either party, but they're both well funded. I know Adrian will point out that Hertel has done better on fundraising than Barrett. Barrett's getting a ton of money from DC. They've counted on him winning the seat from the second. Really, they counted on him trying to beat Slotkin, but they've definitely counted on him winning the seat since Slotkin got out of the way. There's not going to be a shortage of funding for Tom Barrett. It just isn't quite as high as Hertel. I think this thing will go down the wire, but it feels to me like Barrett currently has the upper hand.
Yeah, I think this is going to be close. A couple months ago, I would have told you that it was a pretty strong advantage for Tom Barrett. I would still say like slightest of advantages for Tom Barrett, and the reason is he ran for Congress 2 years ago in the most expensive congressional race in the country. So not only did Republicans spend millions and millions of dollars to define him in a positive way, Democrats spent millions and millions of dollars to define him in a negative way. And so he started out with a massive lead in name ID, just absolutely massive, bigger than you could possibly make up. And Hertel doesn't need to make it all up, but Barrett's name ID is probably around 80%. Curtis needs to get into the 70s with his name ID in order for this to be a winnable race for him. And where he is going to struggle the most to do that and have to invest a lot of time and effort is in Livingston County and Western Oakland County portions of this district. That's where the gap in name ID is going to be the largest because Tom Barrett was introduced to those voters 2 years ago, and Curtis was not. He was working for the governor as her legislative liaison, and prior to that, he was an elected official in Ingham County in that Lansing media market that John's talking about. That's terrible. And so he starts at a deficit in that way. He has the money to make up that name ID disadvantage. There's no question about that. And he's got the abortion issue, frankly, which in this district specifically has proven to be super potent. Neither of these candidates has what I would call like the median position on the abortion issue. But I would say that Curtis and Democrats have done a somewhat better job of defining Tom on that issue than the reverse of them defining Curtis on that issue. And so I expect this one to be extraordinarily close down the wire. It's probably going to end up as the most expensive congressional race in the country again, which is part of the reason that I don't have a television on the main floor of my house because I lived through this 2 years ago.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah, an interesting race. Let's move on to the presidential election and some points. Obviously, we're a popular state right now, right? Everyone's coming here. President seems like every other day you're getting an update. What I'm interested, obviously, want to hear your guys' perspective on the top of the ticket, but I'm also interested to hear about what do you think the dynamic is of ticket splitters in the state of Michigan that may vote for President Trump, but down ticket may vote for some Democrats, or vice versa. Maybe some Republicans that want to vote for Vice President Harris, and then down ticket might vote for some Republicans, and how that could impact the state of Michigan specifically.
That's bang on thing to be asking about, right? Because it's almost impossible for us to know. I was just having a conversation with my pollster earlier today about the inherent selection bias in public opinion polls. People who answer public opinion polls, they've got strong opinions and they're super partisan for the most part. They might tell you that they're independent or undecided, but that's not true. And the way we know is you have to stay on the phone with a pollster for 25 minutes. That's a big ask 6 months ago. It's basically an impossible ask 3 weeks out from an election. And so we're not going to know about those ticket splitters, about those folks that have ambivalent feelings about both parties. And that's compounded by the fact that we're in the midst of a sort of historic realignment of the electorate, where the educated, affluent suburban voters that have been powering Republican electoral victories for the last few decades and also powering their war chest of money, those folks are fleeing the Republican brand in droves at the same time that working class voters who didn't go to college are fleeing the Democratic brand in droves. That's particularly true of men, right? And so you have these two ships passing in the night that makes it really, really hard to unpack. Well, okay, maybe you're an affluent suburban voter and you really like low taxes and you want to keep your money, but Trump's just too much for you. So you might vote for Kamala Harris or you might leave top of the ticket blank. But you know what? This tax cutting Republican that's running for state representative, that sounds pretty good to you. Seems like a normal guy. You can think, hearkening back to the earlier part of our conversation, of somebody like Mark Tisdale in that mode, right? And that's partly what he needs to hang his hat on is, okay, you don't like Donald Trump, and I understand that, right? Like he's goofy, the antics, the whatever, but I'm gonna cut your taxes, right? And I'm gonna cut, small business regulations just the way you like. That's going to be appealing to some voters. And we can't unpack that from public opinion polling because those are normal people, and normal people don't stay on the phone for 25 minutes with a pollster.
Yeah, so far, Adrian said that people are answering the phone right now are not normal. They're really partisan. They have a lot of opinions. I'm just going to add one more thing. They must be very lonely. They're
Yeah.
really,
I have a family who loves me. I don't need to do that.
yeah. You saw in some of the polling in the New York Times over the last 48 hours of what's happening in the Arizona Senate race. And Currie Lake ran for governor last time around. She's a full-on Trumper trying to sort of like recreate the MAGA brand, be a Trump of Arizona, so to speak. Ruben Gallego is winning that race, and it's a state where Trump is ahead. So they're looking at ticket splitters there where people will go for the real Trump, and then when they come down the ballot, they're not willing to do that anymore. They're not willing to vote for Harris, but they'll come back and vote. And we're seeing that a little bit in the Michigan Senate race, as Rogers isn't well known enough or is being defined by the Democrats and Elsa Slotkin. There's a chunk there where he should be able to get those people back if he has the time, because now he has the money. So we'll see that. Another way to look at some of these potentially swing voters is what we're seeing right now is a ton of attention from both the Trump and Harris campaigns on Black males and Hispanic males, especially younger Black and Hispanic males who are going to vote in this election. And part of this is that when the New York Times looked deeper into their battleground polls, they looked at, well, what's going on here? Why is Harris softer with these two groups of people, and why is Trump doing better there? They looked through some of the issue polling, and when it came to build a wall, 40% for young Black voters, 43% for young Hispanic male voters. Deport illegal aliens, 41% and 45%. Is crime high in cities, 47 and 50%. Are we spending too much money in other countries on foreign aid instead of bringing that money home to our cities? Both majority votes between Black male voters and Hispanic male voters. There's a lot there that those voting groups like. And so we may see a high enough percentage of those leak out of the Dem camp, vote for Trump, and then come back over and vote for their normal Dem candidates.
Yeah, really interesting stuff, guys. It's the polling. We could do a whole podcast on polling and targeting, when you're talking about targeting in markets and how you target voters, and whether it's online or TV. I mean, just some really great stuff. We'll have to have you guys back again another time and talk about all that. Maybe when this election's done, we'll get into the meat of that stuff. But really great stuff today, guys. Thank you for your time. We look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83.